What sort of like key you feel like to make a good first person profile, and like the importance of it in general?
I think what matters is that we have a way of describing what matters to somebody from their perspective, and what we've learnt about what good support looks like for them, and what people love, appreciate, admire, or respect about them. And that's for exactly the reason that you've just given, that most of our documents about people are full of what they can't do, or negative reputation issues, or managing risks. And although some of that is required by CQC and local authorities in terms of the documentation we keep on people, what's critically important is that the first page introduces the person in a different way, in the context of what matters to them.
Sure.
So for me, one-page profiles, when they're done well, are the executive summary that you'd see at the front of documentation, but always with the same 3 headings. So where people say, well, we can make it better and do 8 headings, I said, that's absolutely fine, but please don't call it a one-page profile, because a one-page profile just has 3 headings. What matters to you, what's important to you, and what good support looks like. And I think it's just as important that staff have one-page profiles as well, because unless we know what matters to each other and how to support each other well, we can't do a good job of providing person-centred support to each other to enable us to support individuals really well.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I mean, one of the things we used with those is the whole matching staff kind of stuff, and whether that's, you start looking at people's characteristics, shared interests, maybe a certain personality that somebody wants to be with. Like, it all makes perfect sense. There might be a certain activity that somebody's doing. Like, to me, there's nothing worse than like if I was going to the cinema and I'm like got somebody who's taking me who's not really into films, maybe isn't comfortable with it. Like, I can't imagine what that's like for somebody. But that's happened in the past, like, and I'm sure it still does today. But it's nice where possible you can get that kind of nice matching staff support, and I think that's a really powerful tool that goes along with it. But yeah, like you say, with the one-page profiles, like, they're just a little bit more down to earth as well. Like, it's not, and I always say to people, like, like you say, the 3 headings are, just keep it as, like, sometimes people can overthink things too much. I always say keep it as simple as, and what exactly that person wants, because if it's stuff on there that looks great, and it might have all these colourful headings, but it's really, they're not going to use it practical, then there's no point in having it if the person's not really going to have any use for it. I always make sure people, because sometimes I think what's really important over the time I've seen from separating a good person-centered plan to a bad one is always, I think, it's about the process of how you gather that information. Like, anyone can just type up something on one day, but it wouldn't have the kind of thought process that it needs to have had if you're not going to actually, like, either sit with the person and just get it from them, or if the person's not able to give maybe that kind of input or as much input, you make sure you've gone around to that circle of support that know the person well enough. Have you ever, you must have gone to places where it's like it looks fantastic, but you've kind of come away thinking, like, did they do that or did they not? Have you had that in the past, or is that something that's, when you're trying to audit those kind of stuff, like, I can imagine that being quite difficult?
I do know of situations where there's before CQC comes, people spend a lot of time suddenly updating profiles and information without the person, but just to make sure the documents look completed. And of course, it's impossible to do a great job of making sure that the person's reflected in the information if you do it like that. I guess I'd love to see CQC exploring this a bit more, and I know they're bringing more changes into the way that they do inspections. So I think if colleagues in CQC or local authority, when they're reviewing places, started with a one-page profile and then went to ask the individual about how often these things were happening that described in the one-page profile, and whether these things still matter, because it's the connection between what matters to the person, the life that they're living, and what's recorded about them, that we need to connect the dots around that. So we don't get great paperwork that is compliant but doesn't reflect what matters to the person and certainly isn't being put into practice, or great paperwork that clearly reflects what matters to the person and is really, really true to that, but actually isn't happening in the person's day-to-day life. So we need to really be thinking about those three things together, and the most important thing is what happens to the person reflects what matters to them. But often in services it's easy to focus on what really matters is filling in the paperwork so it's compliant with CQC.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up, because I know that they are changing the way they're going to do things now. But from your point of view, like, because obviously now the CQC is, they're very much PCP, like they want to see it, that's for sure, like the approach as well. And it's become something over the years, like from trying to think back to when it was C-Sky and stuff like that before, like it wasn't always at the forefront, like some, they didn't. I remember one guy I sat with, and he kind of just heard about it when I explained it to him, and I was like, okay. So I kind of felt like maybe they're a little bit behind, but it looks like they're getting at the right point now. But do you have much contact with CQC? Like, do they come to you for like your organisation and stuff like that, for like advice around those kind of things that you just explained there, about looking at the process and really going to speak to the person to sort of understand, is it really happening or not, type thing?
I have a great deal of time for the senior leadership in CQC, so David Bean and Andrea Sutcliffe, and I know them to be values-driven people. And I think, so one example is in Wigan. CQC is working in partnership with the commissioners and with the local providers and HSA to look at the paperwork that people are using around supporting people at home, and to ask these questions. How can we make it as person-centred as possible? How can we make it as lean as possible? And how can we do both of those things and make sure it's still compliant? And I think that partnership of CQC, commissioner, provider, supported by Michelle from HSA, is just a brilliant example of working together to get something that's going to work for different stakeholders, so that it really reflects what matters to the person. CQC knows it's compliant, and for providers, they're not spending all their time filling in paperwork. So I think that's a great example that's happening in Wigan under the leadership of Joe Wilmot there.
That sounds good. Now, just I don't want to keep you too long, because I know you're a very busy person. Talking about PCP and person-centered planning, like obviously, I only know it from sort of the care industry, but I am aware that this is not only used here; it's used in other industries. Like, what are some of the other things that it's used in currently, and like how did that get started? Like, did you? Because I know there was something. Was it the prison system at one point? Or am I reading wrong into that?
No, well, my colleague Jill Goodwin and other people in HSA have been doing a lot of great work around schools. So we know that there are several primary schools where everybody, regardless of whether they've got special needs or not, everybody has a one-page profile, including the teachers and the teaching assistants. Right. And they get updated every year as people transition from one class to another. And again, just doing some work around criminal justice with the probation service and looking at one-page profiles and other person-centred thinking tools there. So and in care homes for older people. So there are lots and lots of situations, not just in care and support, but in education and criminal justice as well. And then one of my colleagues who worked in a big pharmaceutical industry ended up working with one of the big providers, and we worked together on one-page profiles, and then he is also consulting to big organisations like pharma companies and is talking to them about one-page profiles too. So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see elements of of one-page profiles emerging in different organisations.
Sure, and that's really key word that you use about like ever evolving, because like I always say to people, PCP, it should never just be something that's just stuck away and left. Like I always say to people, see it as a living document, like keep updating it, because like we as people change, so there's no reason why the people we're looking after wouldn't. Sometimes you go in somewhere and you're like, how old is this? Like they'll say it comes down to like small things, but you think like the history of somebody, that you've got to try and think about it, and people change as they get older, and obviously stuff like, so it's got to be kind of always regularly, like you say, reviewed. And one of the things you said there about like the yearly reviews and stuff like that, that's something now that my company's been using, I think, for the last 4 years, and that's been really, really good. Now, the only problem to that on our side is that obviously a yearly review used to be very different to what it is now. It used to be like you envision this long table with all these health professionals, the parents, us, whereas now we don't really get anybody show up, like the social workers, very seldom. It's now something that just sort of gets sent off for those kind of things, which is a bit of a shame. That's something I wanted to ask you, like with social services and like councils and stuff like that, do they have an interest? Because in what you do and as far as PCP goes, because again it's very hit and miss with some people I talk to, they kind of know it, and other people are very much sort of like out of the loop of what the whole PCP thing is, and maybe the only side of it they realise is maybe like personalised budgets and stuff like that.
I'm really inspired by the work of Ali Gardner, who's a senior lecturer in social work in UCLAN, and she makes sure that all her social work students are doing their own one-page profiles in the first year, and introduces them to concepts behind person-centred thinking and person-centred planning. And I know that she's not alone. We've got some great examples of tutors introducing it into their training, and when students go out on placement, where you've got excellent organisations that have been using person-centred planning, of course they come across it there. And I'm conscious that the world for social workers has really significantly changed over the last 5 years around resources and the implications of the Care Act. So I think the more that we can explore different ways of working in partnership. So again, in one local authority that I'm working with, we're looking at reviews across health and social care. And what you find is that if somebody's got a long-term condition, they'll have a long-term condition review through the GP's practice. If they're supported by social workers, they'll probably have a review, or they'll have a regular review as well. And if they're supported by providers, they'll also get a regular review. Now, if we can pull those together, then sometimes it's streamlining what we're doing across different silos or different areas, so that the person is not having to repeat the same information over and over again. And that gives us more capacity to have the right people in the room supporting the person to make decisions about their lives through things like person-centred reviews.
Absolutely, yeah, it makes perfect sense. Okay, well, I guess to just to end this episode, it's like obviously everything is ever evolving, that's for sure. I'm sure we'll look back on things in the next 10, 20 years or whatever and think, what were we doing? But in terms of person-centered, like for you yourself, like where do you see the future? Is there going to be like because I know things change and maybe the formula or the formats and stuff like that. Is there anything that's like coming up that you can see changing, like whether it's good or bad when it comes to sort of the care sector, and obviously mainly like people with learning disabilities? But is there anything like that will be of impact coming up in the future?
I wonder whether some of the styles of person-centred planning, like paths and maps and personal futures planning, that we'll start to see them mainly being used by community circles and circles of support, and probably led by volunteers and facilitators and community members, and probably less so services, although services will be connected into that. I think we'll start to see a lot more leadership from communities around using person-centred planning with vulnerable people in society, and just generally with each other. I think that in services, we need to be seeing much more around person-centred reviews, and then that being linked to a large group intervention called Working Together for Change, so we can directly connect what people are saying about their lives through person-centred reviews to strategic change with different stakeholders, including commissioners. And the service that I'm currently working with, wellbeing teams, we're a paperless organisation.